So a year ago I posted my first video going over the history of the controversies surrounding the Bayonetta series up till that point. The idea was spurred on after seeing the lack of controversy surrounding the first Bayonetta 3 trailer compared to how controversial the previous entries were. While I did not state it explicitly, by the end I assumed that the controversy surrounding the series was over, and Bayonetta 3 would not be a controversial game.
4,000 US dollars.
I was wrong. Because I've already covered the controversy of the series between 2009 and 2021, I think it would be interesting to cover everything that has happened since then, most importantly since the newest Bayonetta game has been released. While I am happy with our first video and most of it holds up, if you want to watch it I would recommend doing so after this just to see how wrong I was when it comes to some of my predictions. Of course, when it comes to discussing Bayonetta controversies in 2022, there is a clear elephant in the room, which has already been covered to death. However, this is only one of the sources of conflict this franchise has been caught in, and there are others which deserve the attention as well. Also, while I will go over this main controversy, I'm also going to try and cover some aspects of it that often get left out of the conversation when discussing it to keep it fresh. Either way, no more beating around the bush. The first trailer for Bayonetta 3 since the initial teaser was released. While most people didn't pick up on it, some fans who were listening noticed that the voice of Bayonetta sounded slightly different. While nothing was official, some fans started to worry that Hellena might not be returning to voice Bayonetta as she had in the first two entries. Further evidence of this is given 3 months later when Hellena tells a fan on Twitter they might have to deal with her not voicing the character. Less than a month before release, it was officially announced that Hellena would no longer be voicing Bayonetta, and the role would be played by well-known voice actor Jennifer Hale. Bayonetta 3 director Yusuke Miyata explained the reason for this being overlapping circumstances. 13 days before Bayonetta 3 was set to release, Hellena posted an 8-minute long video split over 4 tweets explaining why she was no longer playing the role of Bayonetta. Highlights include only being offered $4,000 in spite of the Bayonetta franchise making millions, that she was only paid $3,000 for the first Bayonetta game, her being forced to re-audition for the role, her personally asking Hideki Kamiya, the creator of Bayonetta, for more, only to be told that $4,000 is a final offer, telling Jennifer Hale that she has no right to act like she is the voice of Bayonetta and sign autographs since she is just copying her original voice work, and her main goal, getting fans to boycott Bayonetta 3 and donate the money that they would spend on it to charity. This was the main focus of the video. While there are some more details about her anxiety surrounding money and some extra drama, these are the main points. Since she made such a compelling case, many gamers and fans of the Bayonetta series jumped to support Taylor. The consensus was that while she was a bit too harsh to Jennifer Hale, she deserved more, and she was right to call for a boycott. There were plenty of discussions surrounding cancelling pre-orders and pirating the game when it released. Taylor very quickly became a figurehead for underpaid and underappreciated voice actors, and since her work on the first 2 Bayonetta games was so beloved, she gained a lot of traction. While most of the attention to Taylor was positive, it wasn't a completely closed case. There were of course fans of Bayonetta who, while supporting Taylor, would still be buying Bayonetta 3. This became, as you can imagine, a massive topic for debate among fans who are arguing over whether it was moral and if you should support the rest of the team who worked on it, not just one voice actor. However, the topic quickly became about more than just Platinum Games, the studio behind Bayonetta, but about the industry as a whole and the poor distribution of pay. There was also some confusion over Jennifer Hale being hired over Hellena. Since Hale had worked on so many big roles throughout her career, many assumed that she would cost more to hire than Taylor, so the logic of her being replaced was put into question. So while on the 15th, the people were generally in favour of Taylor, we did get our first big response from Hideki Kamiya, aforementioned series creator, subtweeting,
"Sad and deplorable about the attitude of untruth. That's all I can tell now. By the way, beware of my rules."
In addition to accusing Taylor of lying, Kamiya is referencing his many rules on Twitter which he uses to justify his mass blocking of his followers. However, this is just the first of many counter-statements to Taylor's claims. The next main development is new Bayonetta voice actress Jennifer Hale responding to the situation on Twitter. She makes it clear that she is restricted by an NDA but reminds her audience that she supports every actor's right to be well paid and is an advocate for her community, reminding us that her reputation speaks for itself. This is when the conversation started to become a bit more balanced. With this, the people who believed Taylor was unjustly harsh to Hale had some support, and more Bayonetta fans were starting to notice the gaps in Taylor's story. It also didn't help that around this time, some of Taylor's old tweets resurfaced that exposed her indication of support for the Blue Lives Matter movement, as well as some potentially transphobic comments. This nudged a lot of Bayonetta fans to abandon the boycott. However, there were also some people countering this with some questionable statements Hale made about autism. While this gained some attention, it quickly got overshadowed by the developments the next day. Just 3 days after Hellena Taylor's original video, a report published by Jason Schreier through Bloomberg exposed that Taylor's video twisted the truth, and she had actually been offered much more than the original $4,000 she had originally claimed. The facts surrounding this are blurry, but the gist of it is that Taylor was offered around $4,000 per session for at least 3 to 4 sessions to voice Bayonetta, which would have given her at least somewhere above $15,000 for the role, which, while still not much in the grand scheme of the Bayonetta series, it's, of course, a lot more than just $4,000. It was then reported that Taylor didn't accept this offer and instead wanted a 6-figure sum for her work, as well as residuals, and after this, negotiations eventually dwindled. This report, coming from a relatively trustworthy third party, was all that was needed for public opinion to completely switch on Hellena Taylor. It took Taylor 6 days to respond to this development for a series of tweets. In this, she essentially admits that her claim of $4,000 was not the whole truth, putting the credibility of any of her previous statements into question. However, she did go on to claim that details of the Bloomberg report were untrue and reiterated that she was only paid $3,000 for the first Bayonetta. However, the only thing most people took away from this was that she admitted that her first video, the one that brought so much attention to underpaid workers in the industry, was built on a lie. You would think that on the day of Bayonetta 3's release, after bringing much more attention to a game she attempted to boycott, it probably could have not gotten much worse for Hellena Taylor. But if you can remember, in her first video, Taylor asked fans to donate money to charity that they would have spent on Bayonetta 3. So, in a thread, Taylor lists a few of the suggestions that she admits she has donated to in the past. While most of these charity suggestions were standard, Billboards for Life stood out as a charity solely dedicated to putting up anti-abortion billboards in Kentucky. When researching this particular development, I think Mike Drucker for The Gamer put it best.
Because if you're going to turn heel, you gotta go full villain. I'm sure if there's one thing Bayonetta herself would approve of, it's making sure people don't have the right to choose what to do with their bodies.
You could spend pages summarizing the events of Hellena Taylor Gate and going deeper into the details, but this has already been done. However, I want to make sure I had the major events in order to help contextualize any statements that might refer to this scandal. What I think is more worth discussing than the event itself is the impact it had and the implications of the reaction to it. Now, I doubt Taylor intended this, but whenever the next worker in the gaming industry, especially if they're a voice actor, speaks up about bad pay, there will be a lot more subconscious doubt. So many fans of gaming flocked to vocally support Taylor and were left looking foolish when it was exposed that she lied, and when you're burned once, you're going to try and avoid it again. The act of her lying is one thing, but the impact left is that people who are honestly struggling with their income are now going to have a much harder time gaining support. And this is even worse when you consider that Taylor was right about some things, like how there are plenty of underpaid voice actors, but now she's lied about it, they're going to get a lot less sympathy. Norris released an article interviewing voice actors in response to the Hellena Taylor controversy, and while this article doesn't defend her, it does shine a light on how unfair this line of work can be. In a quote, Emma Samuel says,
"Actors don't know the full scope of their roles until they are in the session, which is long past the time for agents to negotiate on their behalf.
This is just another example of how much corruption there is in the industry. We can also see this in how often companies crunch their workers to reach deadlines. This has gained a lot more attention in recent years with big name cases like Cyberpunk 2077. While the way she went about it was all wrong, Hellena Taylor probably had reason to be upset. However, her impact has now essentially given the games industry a get out of jail free card next time workers try to speak out. The other aspect of the Taylor controversy that is worth addressing is how public reaction shifted as events developed, more particularly when people were willing to abandon Taylor's boycott. You would think that those who jumped to support Taylor's boycott would have only stopped when it was exposed that she was lying, but for some fans it happened a lot earlier. A lot of people were seemingly looking for excuses to discredit Taylor so they could justify buying Bayonetta 3. Even the day her video came out, people were trying to find inaccuracies in her story, which of course ended up being exposed. This is also why so many people celebrated when it was proven that she had some problematic beliefs, as they could justify re-pre-ordering the game. I'm pretty aware of this because I was in the same position. Like many Bayonetta fans, I had been hyped for the game for a long time. So, being faced with the possibility of not being able to play it so close to the finish line was a lot of mental gymnastics. On that day of the 17th, when it was gaining attention that Taylor had some pretty awful viewpoints, but she hadn't been proven a liar, it was already becoming pretty hard to justify supporting her course, and this puts you in a very morally grey position. Should you stop a boycott in support of underpaid workers just because the person spearheading the boycott is a bad person? The course is still in support of the same people, but it starts to feel pointless when you're following the lead as someone who is becoming the opposite of an inspiration, and a day later it gets even more pointless when she is proven to be lying. While Taylor could have brought attention to a serious issue by being more transparent, by choosing to dance around the truth, she created a massive headache that improved no one's life, including hers, and made a lot of people's lives more difficult. While the harassment she faced is one thing, so is the mass harassment of Jennifer Hale and Hideki Kamiya, even if neither of them are perfect people. But none of these three big names are the actual victims. But it is the people who have much less of a platform who will now have a much harder time negotiating better pay because of it. The Hellena Taylor saga is just one aspect of the controversy surrounding the Bayonetta franchise in the last year, but it has stained this game's reputation permanently, and plenty of reviews for Bayonetta 3 mention this drama. However, when it comes to the actual game, this was only the dramatic prologue to the tumultuous release of Bayonetta 3. If you look at the accolades trailer for Bayonetta 3, you could easily be convinced that this game released to near perfect reviews and that it was well received by all. But just like how it is with a lot of accolades trailers, this is not the whole truth. Bayonetta 3 did review incredibly well from most mainstream sources. However, when you start to look at more in-depth reviews and look for less standardized commentary, you can see that this game got quite a mixed reception. This is not me saying that the mainstream reviews are false, but when you look at more specific critiques, it seems to stumble a lot more compared to earlier entries in the series. The game is good, but when seen as part of a trilogy, its flaws are emphasized. But games come out to mixed reception all the time, so why is this controversial? The reason I think it is because there is very little agreement over why this is. When you look at the reviews and opinion pieces on Bayonetta 3, some critics might tear an aspect of the game to shreds, while others might say it's their favorite part. In this section, I'll be using a lot of negative examples from critics, as well as citing fan opinions, so if you're a die-hard Bayonetta 3 defender, this might cause an issue. It's also worth disclaiming that not all of these opinions I share, and I did enjoy 3, however, I'm also more than capable of seeing its flaws, of which there are quite a few. But before going into these critiques, it's worth saying that there is one aspect most reviewers and fans seem to agree on. There is of course a minority that disagrees, but almost everyone that has played Bayonetta 3 has sung the praises of the core gameplay. Playing as Bayonetta and summoning demons is just as fun as it was in previous games, and certain aspects have been refined, like the new method of unlocking weapons being streamlined, the demon masquerade, and summoning adding variety to the gameplay formula. I could go deeper and deeper into praise of how Bayonetta plays in 3, however, everyone else has already done this. There are very few disagreements around the time spent controlling Bayonetta in combat, and that is a testament to its quality. But with everything other than fighting as Bayonetta, there are complaints. And one of the most substantial critiques is how often we are pulled away from the core gameplay. Compared to the previous entries in the trilogy, which have contained occasional gimmick levels, in 3, a substantial portion of the game is spent not playing as Bayonetta. As a concept, this could have paid off, but the execution got a very mixed response. Interspersed between chapters, there are 4 side levels where you play as Jean in side-scrolling stealth missions. I personally enjoyed these, since they were quick and a nice change of pace without any frustrating mechanics. However, I can understand why others hated these sections. All 4 of the levels are pretty similar, and if you just look at side by side of how different this plays compared to the rest of the game, you can see why they weren't enjoyed by all. But as I said, at least they were quick. What ended up taking most of the brunt is Viola. Compared to Jean's missions, which total to less than 30 minutes of gameplay, you play as series newcomer Viola for 4 of the 14 chapters in Bayonetta 3. That's more than a quarter of the game's content. This wouldn't have been too much of an issue for me. While I don't love her design, her personality is refreshing when compared to Bayonetta and Jean. On top of this, her soundtrack is a standout for me that I never got tired of, but Mashable's Alex Perry put it best.
There is just one big problem. Viola isn't very fun to play.
For a quarter of Bayonetta 3, instead of getting to enjoy the silky smooth controls of Bayonetta with her varied arsenal of weapons, you are stuck with Viola. By the end of her first level, I was tired of her katana, darts, and Cheshire summon, and this never changed. But worst of all, the game asks you to work against your instincts to learn to parry instead of dodging like Bayonetta to activate the powered up witch time. I wanted to like the Viola levels since I'd heard that they weren't well liked before playing, but her gameplay made that a difficult task. On top of the 4 levels spent with Viola and the side missions with Jean, even Bayonetta's levels try to drag you out of her core combat-focused gameplay. While the gimmicky sections in previous games were more forgivable for being more sparse, having to deal with them in between Viola levels wore my patience thin. In a previous Bayonetta game, I would have put up with having to ride a giant hellhound for a verse, or spending some time shooting on the bird summon, and I could have coped better with a headache-inducing tarantula platforming section. But having these sections take away from core Bayonetta combat in her already abridged number of levels was grating, to say the least. But moving on from that slightly more personal rant, critics and fans also had a mixed reaction to the game's presentation and story. For the presentation, upon release, but even when looking at trailers, there was a lot of criticism of how the game looked, and it was clear that it was being held back by being stuck as a Switch exclusive. Isaiah Colbert commented,
"Everyone's faces looked like they were made out of sandpaper. It was hard not to notice that Bayonetta's model looked smoother and shinier in the 8-year-old Bayonetta 2.
And Parish notes,
Bayonetta is too pretty. And the things she does with her hair, her fighting, and the demons she summons are all far too complex to be contained to 180p. Bayonetta is a woman who demands to be seen in all her glory, and the Switch doesn't do her justice."
It was not just the graphical quality of Bayonetta 3 that was critiqued, but some of the designs as well. The previous two Bayonetta games, especially the first, had such clear visual direction and inspiration, and this can be seen in the grotesquely detailed enemy designs featured in both. The more confused aesthetic of Bayonetta 3 is reflected in the homunculi enemies and how they pale in comparison to earlier offerings. Colbert calls them uninspired new enemies, Gelbart describes them as a generic aesthetic, and Summers directly compares them, saying they have a lack of personality or creativity compared to the previous game. It's even more of a shame when you see the creativity in some of the new demon designs in the game, which look amazing, but instead you are stuck fighting such boring enemies throughout most of the story. And on the topic of the story, out of every aspect of Bayonetta 3, this was the most widely criticised. I struggled to find many defenders of Free's story, let alone passionate defenders, but when it came to those complaining about it, I am practically drowning in examples. Bayonetta has always been an action game primarily, but the story is a major aspect of the series with plenty of cutscenes and narrative featured in every entry. Now, while neither 1 or 2 are tales for the ages, and they do have their critics, in comparison to 3 they are beloved stories. Clark makes a direct comparison, saying,
"The story has never been particularly coherent in previous titles, but I at least felt somewhat engaged in the first and second games."
And Summers also felt the incoherence, saying,
Platinum Games decided to regurgitate every lazy, no-stakes storytelling technique from the modern Disney MCU playbook to make a story where nothing of real consequence ever happens, and any major development can be explained away with a mundane multiverse explanation.
Bayonetta 3 released at perhaps peak cultural oversaturation of the multiverse plot device, so I think people generally had a little less patience for it. However, what annoyed a lot of Bayonetta fans more than the overall narrative is how this multiverse altered the characters. Colbert cites mistreatment of beloved characters, Clark says Bayonetta feels wrong and Luca might as well be someone else entirely, and Summers also compares them to previous games, saying,
"The characters previously had a bit more personal style and flair to their dialogue. They all feel like toned down, play-by-number versions of their previous selves."
Some of the critiques about characters feeling uncanny can be explained away by the multiverse aspect of the plot, but that would also just mean that we're stuck with inferior characters for a whole game, which is an explanation, but not a very satisfying one. On the note of unsatisfying elements of Bayonetta 3, a lot of the story and character complaints are focused on the game's ending. It is going to get its own section since the controversy derived from the ending is its own beast, and also that way those who are looking to avoid spoilers can easily skip it. The critiques surrounding Bayonetta 3 are a source of controversy because all the feelings about the critiques were impassioned. Fans of Bayonetta have been waiting so long that they were willing to defend a lot, while other fans have been waiting so long that they just expected more from the game. And of course, these fans argued, as people on the internet with passionate opinions do. This led some reviewers on mainstream sites getting harassed, which is of course never a good thing, and it really threw me back to the Bayonetta defenders of 2010. And it also didn't help, as I mentioned, no one really agreed wholeheartedly on anything except the core gameplay. I mentioned that a lot of people hated the sections where you don't play as Bayonetta, but there are people out there who like the change of pace. While the graphics are panned by a lot of people, others think they look good for the Switch and like the varied aesthetic that came with the multiverse. And even the story, which was the most widely hated aspect of the game, had some people who liked it, and some at least appreciated that it was a bit easier to follow than earlier games. Everyone who played Bayonetta 3 had a mixed bag of opinions, agreeing with some people on some things while wildly disagreeing with others. You might think that this is something which happens with all games, or just media in general, but I think Bayonetta 3 has been uniquely polarizing with just how much people can't seem to agree on. For me, personally, I enjoyed the core gameplay, hated the gimmick sections, liked the genre levels, got tired of how many Viola sections there were. I didn't notice that many graphical issues since it usually looked good in motion, but the lack of enemy variety was sad. And with the story, while I think the pacing of the levels was a bit too slow with how many collectibles were scattered, I didn't have too many issues with the story or the characters until the ending chapters. I don't think that I'm the only Bayonetta fan that hoped it would be the best in the series, and not to quote myself, but I can't help but mourn all of its wasted potential. controversial, and because of this, it ended up probably being my least favourite of the trilogy. The controversy with the mixed reception of Bayonetta 3 isn't as bombastic as a pre-release Hellena Taylor drama, but it is a type of long-lasting controversy that will keep Bayonetta 3 as likely the most divisive game in the series amongst fans. If you're missing the drama though, the ending of 3 provided it. So, over the last few chapters of 3, it is revealed that Viola is a child of Bayonetta and Luca, showing that at some point they had a romantic relationship. On top of this, Bayonetta and Luca die in each other's arms after the final boss, then it is confirmed that Viola will be the next Bayonetta. Of course, there are multiverse shenanigans, but this was the ending for the Bayonetta we played as in Bayonetta 3. This ending shows that she has been in a straight relationship with Luca specifically, and how her story ended caused quite a bit of an uproar. But why is this controversial? People are straight all the time. The best place to start answering this is why people didn't think Bayonetta was straight in the first place. The crux of it is, a significant portion of Bayonetta fans saw the chemistry between Bayonetta and Jean as a lot more romantic and believed that this was coding for them in a relationship. This was further supported by the lack of any romantic tension between Luca and Bayonetta in the first 2 entries in the series. I've actually already covered a lot of reasons why people prefer Bayonetta and Jean before. Phillips also mentions Luca, who while shown to be attracted to Bayonetta with the pair often having potentially flirty banter, Bayonetta is not shown to reciprocate his feelings. The closest she gets is teasing him, but just as often she is shown to patronize and baby him. Rightfully so, with him often acting as the inept comic relief. Contrasting this with the mutual respect and almost domestic interactions between Bayonetta and Jean, it is obvious why many sapphic gamers identify with Bayonetta. There are more specifics in that video, but it is clear that I'm not the only person who interpreted their relationship this way. As soon as this ending leaked, fans of this pairing flocked to social media to post evidence of the relationship between the two, and share their distaste for the ending. There were also plenty of articles written about the ending ruining the character of Bayonetta and what she stood for. Because of the circumstances, this was the most public uprising of Bayonetta and Jean shippers, and this of course led to the biggest backlash to this as well. Just as angry as they were about Bayonetta and Luca ending up together, those who disagreed were just as angry that these people were suggesting that Bayonetta could ever be attracted to a woman. 2 articles specifically, being the previously quoted article by Ash Parrish and an article by Maddie Myers, were both critical of Bayonetta 3, specifically the romantic choice with the ending. These articles were then subject to enough hate that Carey reported on it saying,
"In the aftermath of this post and these 2 reviews, I noticed the increasingly toxic Twitter conversations around the game get really nasty and reactive. Both reviewers and anyone who dared to post their viewpoints are getting accused of not just being flat out wrong, but being silly or a joke, or worse of all, lacking knowledge." Even though Parrish and Myers say in their reviews they've been fans of Bayonetta for years. Even though reviews and works of fiction aren't objective, just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean they're wrong or uninformed.
This level of conflict is obviously unfortunate, and a lot of people were harassed just for sharing a relatively harmless opinion, but a lot of the conflict was also misguided. While of course some people were upset that Bayonetta didn't end up with Jean, I think most fans were more upset that her relationship with Luca just came out of nowhere. Parrish specifically notes in their controversial article,
"There are some incredible leaps of character development that we're supposed to just take on faith, while the game abandoned 2 whole games worth of established motivations and relationships."
And Myers comments on the jump in character importance, saying,
"Why he's suddenly such a big deal when previously he was little more than comic relief amounts to a big heteronormative shrug."
So, while there is obviously some upset about Bayonetta not being with Jean, it is clear that the frustration is more focused on her relationship with Luca materializing from nowhere. Again, this is something else that can be explained away by the multiverse argument, and that this isn't actually our Bayonetta, and people have been pointing this out frequently. But, in a game where this isn't made clear until the end, and that this Bayonetta acts almost identically to the Bayonetta from previous games, you can see why most fans act like this is all just the same Bayonetta. It also doesn't help that since the story isn't exactly the greatest, the audience wasn't in the most forgiving mood to accept unexplained character changes. The ironic thing is, I think that most people who are harassing fans upset with the straight ending probably don't like the ending either. Objectively, the complete lack of a substantial build-up makes the narrative payoff feel unearned. I think the reason there was such a heated conflict is because this was a perfect excuse for the Bayonetta civil war. Okay, that's dramatic, but there is a clear divide in the Bayonetta fanbase. I'm pretty familiar with groups who enjoy the same media but interpret it in completely different ways, and I recognise a lot of similarities with Bayonetta. There are the Bayonetta fans who see the main character as a gay icon, whether she is queer herself or not. And then, there are the Bayonetta fans who do not see this, and a lot of them actively fight against Bayonetta being associated with anything gay. If you don't believe this, you can just look at anyone publicly associating Bayonetta with anything queer, and if there are enough comments, someone will disagree, saying something along the lines of, "What happened to Bayonetta fans?" So, since writing this, I actually found a thread on Reddit which perfectly encapsulated what I'm talking about, called "Has anyone noticed the influx of bigoted cis-het dude bros in the Bayo fandom after Bayo 3's release?" I was gonna look through it and see if I can find any good examples, because it's exactly what I'm talking about here. But the post has been taken down by the moderators because apparently it was becoming a cesspool, and I can believe that based on just what I've seen from looking at it. So I'm not going to go through it, but yeah, you just don't have to look hard to find examples of what I'm talking about. Both of these groups have been fans of Bayonetta since its inception, and both have been vocal parts of the fanbase, with some dominating conversation more than others at different times. Back to the point, the maybe perhaps exaggerated Bayonetta civil war, I think people being vocally upset that Bayonetta ended up with Luca was the perfect spark for these disagreeing Bayonetta fans to have such a public conflict. Now, I could just rehash a bunch of forum posts and threads of people arguing, but it would get repetitive fast, and you can already understand why they were upset with each other. But if for some reason The Sun felt it was necessary to cover the story, then you know it had to have gotten sufficiently ugly. There were some people questioning not just that Bayonetta could be a lesbian or bi, but that she could be a queer icon at all, and honestly, look at the material. If you don't get it, I don't think you ever will. The Straightonetta Bayonetta controversy was messy, but it was also reactionary, and while it will be remembered, I don't think it will be as long-lasting as discussions surrounding the quality of Bayonetta 3 as a whole. However, I think it will occasionally be brought up when the topic of the ending arises. However, there is a final controversy that still hasn't fully unfolded. So it's probably presumptuous to call Cereza and the Lost Demon controversial already. It hasn't even been released. More the rumblings of a controversy to come. If you're unaware, on December 9th, 2022, only a little over a month since Bayonetta 3 released, a prequel titled Bayonetta Origins Cereza and the Lost Demon was announced, and immediately given the release date of March 17th, 2023. At the time of writing, the release is less than 2 months away and we still don't have much to go off, but enough to cause some conversation. Currently, we only have the announcement trailer and the roughly 10-minute demo that was hidden inside Bayonetta 3 as an Easter egg. It looks to be a fixed perspective storybook style RPG with a completely different gameplay style to a standard Bayonetta game. It also seems to have a much stronger focus on story. We have no idea how long the game will be, but from what I guess based on similar style games and from what other people have been saying, it will be around 8 to 12 hours. Could be longer or even shorter, but likely in that range. Nothing really wrong with this. It is coming out incredibly soon after Bayonetta 3, but if it's ready, it's ready. However, what immediately stood out to me and quite a few others is the cost of the game. Currently in the UK, pre-orders for the game are at $49.99, down from $69.99, both of which seem incredibly steep for a game of this style. For comparison, this is exactly how much Bayonetta 3 cost when it launched. However, Bayonetta 3 was a sequel with years in development and a massive budget, and while Cereza and the Lost Demon could be a good game, it certainly doesn't look like it had the same amount of effort put into it as 3 did. When the trailer was released, I saw some reaction to the price, but I had to do some digging to find actual conversation about it. After making a Reddit post and looking at the comments on other posts which have a similar premise, I can pretty confidently say that I have a grasp of the general reaction. There was a majority of people confused about the price, calling it too expensive, and of course there were some defenders saying we don't know enough about the game yet, which is fair. However, what surprised me more was that people were more worried about the actual content of the game. I had gotten so sidetracked by the exorbitant price that I hadn't even really considered the gameplay. So the main issue, which had originally completely gone over my head, is that the game is essentially only for Bayonetta fans, while also not for them at all. The game is hyper-focused on the lore of the Bayonetta series, specifically the lore which was set up in 3. Because of this, it is not going to be the best entry point to the series. A prequel should be a good entry point to the series, but this doesn't seem to be what Cereza and the Lost Demon is going for. But at the same time, the gameplay is a complete 180 from anything related to Bayonetta, and with Bayonetta being a game which most people enjoy for the core gameplay and the combat, changing that will of course alienate a massive majority of the fans who like this aspect of the series. And to make it worse, a lot of fans of Bayonetta's story have been massively turned off after the story of Free was received negatively. If the same writers who wrote the story of Free are working on a story-focused game, why would you trust it? Considering all of these factors, you can see how the audience of the game keeps getting smaller and smaller. This is not me saying that no one will play it, but even in groups of Bayonetta fans, the people saying that they will buy it on release are in the minority. It is much more common to see people saying that they will wait until it's discounted, watch a playthrough, or some just seem to ignore the game as a whole. And the worst part is, this could be a good game. The gameplay looks like it could be fun, but with the steep price, the change in gameplay genre, and the complete lack of trust fans have in the series writers, this game feels destined to not do amazingly. I think the timing could have been so much more fitting if the game was released before Bayonetta 3. It could have filled some time in the hiatus and hyped up fans for Free instead of coming out when we have barely caught our breath. Cereza and the Lost Demon could have even addressed one of the biggest issues with Free by contextualizing some of the story before release. This could hypothetically make Free's story more cohesive. But it is now just a game that focuses on aspects set up by a very badly received narrative. As a Bayonetta fan, I'm hoping this is all proven wrong, and Cereza and the Lost Demon has a lot more depth than initially shown off, or that the pre-order price gets dropped, but with Nintendo publishing it, I doubt it. Everything I say here could and probably will change with another trailer, and this can serve as a time capsule of my hesitance to trust this game. But in the meantime, there is a range of cheaper RPGs to choose from, and these haven't been written by people who also wrote the story for Bayonetta 3. Because of this, I can see it being an uphill battle for Cereza and the Lost Demon to be successful. It took me a while to work out why the decisions Platinum are making with Bayonetta are frustrating me so much at the moment, but I eventually put my finger on it. Bayonetta is suffering from the impact of a premature reboot. Bayonetta 3 went in a completely different direction with the story having a lot of the game dedicated to setting up a future reboot. This can be evidenced with Viola taking over at the end and the upcoming prequel looking like it will focus on the lore that is new with Bayonetta 3. But in my opinion, Bayonetta wasn't ready for a reboot. I think the best time for a reboot is when the series needs freshening up after it has become oversaturated, not halfway through the third entry of a series which has been spread over 13 long years. And with Cereza and the Lost Demon likely being our last time spent with the Bayonetta, the original, I think we are losing her far too soon. And perhaps the worst place to spring a reboot on fans is after 8 years of waiting in the middle of a badly executed story. It reminds me of when the Devil May Cry series was rebooted with DMC Devil May Cry in 2013, but since it shifted so much from the original game and was badly received, the series eventually reverted back with Devil May Cry 5 a few years later. The reboot was badly received, but at least people knew it was coming. But with the new Bayonetta timeline ambushing us when the trilogy hadn't even had a proper conclusion, it feels like Platinum jumped the gun. I can't help but feel a bit guilty for perpetuating a lot of negativity surrounding a game series I enjoy so much, but for a good game, Bayonetta 3 failed in a very unique way. While it is a reward for those who waited so long for it to release, the events surrounding it have alienated a massive portion of its audience as well. Whether you're a fan who got burned defending Hellena Taylor, if you're unhappy with the divisive aspects of the game or upset about the ending, or just annoyed with the direction the franchise is going, there is a lot to be frustrated about. Hopefully, Cereza and the Lost Demon is good, but after that it's a lot of question marks. Like, if we end up getting the newly rebooted Viola as Bayonetta, then this could be refreshing, but can she fill the massively charismatic heels Cereza has left empty? I can be hopeful, but I'm also not going to bet on it. But Bayonetta has been a divisive series for an ever-changing list of reasons since 2009, and honestly, at this point, I'd be disappointed if that changed. If you've made it this far, thank you, and if you like this video, I'd recommend going back and watching my original Bayonetta video. I'm still really happy with how it's turned out. It's just this, but before 2022, old Bayonetta drama, and it was really fun to look into, kind of like, there's a lot more to go over, so it's a bit more, I couldn't be as specific as I was as this one, because it was like 12 years worth of controversy, but it's still a fun video, and I still think it holds up. And if you like this style of content in general, subscribing would be amazing, because this is what I do. This is kind of stuff I've been posting for the last year. I don't always post video essays, but it's generally my default. This is kind of the stuff I enjoy making. But yeah, and thank you to Jay for doing the quote work. I love having someone else to do longer quotes in the videos, and Jay does it amazingly. I haven't had him in the past couple videos because not many of them have had quotes, so it was fun to have him back in the videos. It was great. And thank you, Annie, for helping me with the script, because the first draft of this was an absolute mess and incoherent. So having her help me go through it and sort that out was great. But there's just some things I want to point out while I got the outro, which I kind of missed in the original video, or like didn't find a way to fit in. But yeah, I promise I don't hate Bayonetta 3. I feel like my whole mixed reception section, I was like, I'm being far too negative. This is just too much negativity. And I tried to keep on fitting in. Oh, I like Bayonetta 3, but yeah, no, it's a good game, but obviously it's flawed. But the one thing which does piss me off about it the most, which I couldn't find a way to fit in, because it's so petty. In Bayonetta 1, her guns are red, the game's background is red. In Bayonetta 2, her guns are blue, the background of the game is blue. Game's case, that is. And in Bayonetta 3, I saw the reveal trailer, I saw her guns are purple, I was like, sick, we're gonna have a purple background on the case. It's red again. Like, red and purple look awful together. It's just a really badly designed case compared to the first one. Like, the pose is cool, but it just doesn't fit with a red background, and I'm really annoyed. Like, were they scared of having a purple background? I don't know. I just recorded the outro, and I'm now collecting pictures for the outro. I Mandela affected this whole point for myself. Bayonetta 1 doesn't have a red case. It does sometimes when you're looking at the collection of Bayonetta 1 and 2, but that outrage was completely misplaced. The original Bayonetta 1 case had a blue background, but then why did they switch to a red background? I think my anger's still justified. But yeah, I think people are going to switch up on Bayonetta 3, like with Pokemon Generations. Like, every time something new comes out, people will kind of be more forgiving for the last one, so they can hate on the new thing. But I don't know, maybe it won't happen as much as Bayonetta 3, because it has some inherent qualities which make it a bit more easy to dislike, but I'm not sure. Also, something which I didn't really find out until I was kind of solidifying the draft for this, and I couldn't find a way to fit it in properly, but Jennifer Hale did apologise for her kind of uninformed comments about autism. You can take that how you want, but I felt kind of bad completely ignoring that she did apologise, because like Hellena Taylor hasn't addressed any of her problematic comments, and it's like, at least Jennifer Hale has. Also, very recently, I'm not sure if it was revealed in the art book, because it's happened around the same time the Bayonetta 3 art book has like started being posted around, but Kamiya has said that people have misinterpreted the ending of Bayonetta 3, and that Bayonetta Cereza is still alive somehow. I don't know how everyone misinterpreted it. Maybe if everyone misinterpreted it, he's the problem. Just saying. But yeah, so all of my comments about the series being rebooted could just be wrong. But yeah, just wanted to say that Kamiya decided to pull that out of nowhere. But yeah, if you're still around, I would absolutely love any critical feedback you have, because I've been doing this for a year and I'm happy with like the growth I've made in a year, but there are some things I'm sure which I've missed, and like there's still lots of room I have to grow, essentially. And if you have anything, you might be like, oh, it's obvious, I won't point that out, or I don't want to be too harsh, just say it in the comments. Obviously, if you like it, say that as well. But if there's anything I've missed out on, or you think I can improve on, just say it, because I'd love to hear it. And yeah, thanks for sticking around.